So welcome everyone. I'm happy to see everybody. And today I'm going to go over the Bodhisattva Vow as it was presented in North Carolina, give an overview and context for the Bodhisattva Vow in general. And then Kathy relayed to me a series of questions that people had last week. So in the context of all of this, I hope most of the questions will be addressed as well. So first of all, I'm so happy that many of you were able to join in online with His Holiness. And if you missed it, he's giving the Bodhisattva again today. He's in Arizona, and he'll be giving it starting at 11:30. So you can go to the Garchin Institute site, and it's always good to take it many, many times. But let's go over what was presented, because it was highly unusual, in the sense that in the Drikung tradition, the very special transmission of the Bodhisattva Vow is given only in special years. So not every year at these great prayer assemblies that happen in the pig, monkey, and snake years. So every 4 years, this 2-day presentation or transmission would be given, and His Holiness condensed it to one morning. So that was quite wonderful and special. And what is remarkable about it is that in this particular transmission, the vow is given from 3 different perspectives or 3 different intentions. So it incorporates the strains of how the Bodhisattva vow traveled throughout Mahayana Buddhism as they were given person to person to person. Following cultivating aspiration from the perspective of aspiration, making a commitment to train in 2 different ways. And then the third ultimate bodhicitta, action bodhicitta, was the third aspect, or action bodhicitta. So first of all, it may have seemed elaborate to you, but it's all in our Sunday morning prayer book. So I'll point that out to you as I discuss it this morning. And I find it much easier to talk about it visually. So I'm going to share the screen again. So I'm starting where we left off. Just thinking again, where is the starting point? And the starting point is that we each have Buddha nature, we each have the seed of enlightenment, and the Dharma path is, as we are saying in our 4 Dharmas of Gampopa, the Dharma path is clearing away confusion, learning how not to harm ourselves or others, and cultivating understanding of virtue and wisdom. And so one helpful example that's often used is the muddy water becoming clear. So on the far right, we have the very muddy water. And that's like the seed with all of its roots. And as our mind becomes clear, as we stop being controlled by our habitual patterns, those naturally recede, and what has been there all along, our Buddha nature, becomes evident. So I'm hearing an echo, Kathy. Can you just check that no one else has their microphone on? All right, so I wanted to talk about the evolution of the Bodhisattva vow, and it's using a lot of names that you're not familiar with. So I found this chart online, and you can see where Buddhism begins around 650 BCE. And as Buddhism is held, and as it evolves, almost 100 years later, 700 or 800 years later, we have Nagarjuna, and at the same time, Buddhism going to China, Tibet, Korea. So Nagarjuna is considered the great revealer, or the great establishment of the Mahayana, the Prajnaparamita teachings, and the Bodhisattva ideal becoming much more prominent. It doesn't mean that it was not in earlier Buddhism, but it became more of an emphasis. And this Bodhisattva ideal is that we're practicing not only for our own benefit, but for all sentient beings, and that we are doing this training and accumulation of merit and wisdom for the benefit of all sentient beings, so that all may become enlightened. So this is the great second turning of the wheel, this great understanding of the depth of Buddhist teachings and the richness that came from 800 years of contemplation by brilliant people. So Nagarjuna is one of the lineages of person-to-person transmitting the Bodhisattva vow. And then if you look right in the middle, you'll see Atisha. And Atisha and Asanga are the second great lineage of the Bodhisattva vow. So here is a enlarged version, and you see that these Kagyu lineage figures, excuse me, existed all around the same time. So there was another great flowering of Buddhism. We can think of it as the third turning of the wheel of Buddhism, where Buddha nature became emphasized and understood. And Atisha and Marpa, one of the significant Kagyu figures, lived at the same time. And then their students going down to Jigten Sumgun, they were all alive within the same 150 years. You can also see Shantideva. Shantideva was earlier, so we studied Shantideva. And the actual words of the Bodhisattva vow come from Shantideva's poetry. So there is, as Buddhism became established in these range of countries beyond India, beyond Sri Lanka, it was established as Mahayana Buddhism and cultivated the Bodhisattva ideal. So this brings us to what we received on Saturday. So this giving of the three vows incorporated all of those lineages, both Nagarjuna, Atisha, Shantideva, and it began with holiness creating a protection circle. So some people were wondering, it seemed a little elaborate to them. So there was, because it was this special transmission that's very rarely given, In our Drikung tradition, which is a Vajrayana tradition, there is a protection circle. And what are we actually protecting? We're protecting ourselves from distraction. So there is a sense of creating the ground, creating the auspicious conditions. And then holiness began by saying, in order to take the Bodhisattva vows, there are elements that need to be present. And the first is refuge. And so he gave a very short and pith refuge ceremony, cultivating the four immeasurables. And as we were working with those recitations are included in our Sunday morning prayer book. So the first layer of aspiration bodhicitta was the first two verses of our prayer book. All sentient beings, especially those enemies who hate me, obstructors who harm me. And then the second prayer that we call action bodhicitta, from now until enlightenment, till death, till this time tomorrow. Those were the words that made up what was the first layer of understanding what the bodhisattva commitment is. And this is at the level of aspiration. The second layer, which goes along with a deep understanding of the four immeasurables, particularly equanimity, in which all sentient beings are equally precious and loved, not making distinctions. This is my friend, my family, versus this is a person I have a hard time with. So cultivating an understanding of the four immeasurables is another layer of training in aspiration bodhicitta. And the words that we recited with His Holiness about aspiration bodhicitta in the second layer comes from the middle of our prayer book. And let me just quote to you. Just as the Sugatas of old gave birth to bodhicitta, that 4 lines was what we recited at that moment. I commit to following in their footsteps, to nurturing aspiration bodhicitta, and moving from aspiration to action. So this is all at an aspiration level. And some definitions say, well, this is not, this is more of a commitment than a vow. But in essence, in Buddhism, we are evolving in depth. We're not going from higher to lower, we're evolving in depth. So the aspiration, as we develop it, as we learn how not to cause harm, learn how to practice the virtues, commit to studies, commit to the Lojong training as a way of life, then that naturally moves into action bodhicitta over time. And because we have a strong foundation of aspiration, then what we're able to effectively accomplish is more skillful in the action bodhicitta. And so that's why there is the foundation that's emphasized of aspiration bodhicitta. And in fact, all of Mahayana Buddhism emphasizes the aspiration. The understanding is, yes, every action is in the direction of virtue when we have a positive intention, but the full understanding is when we have totally understood emptiness, when we no longer have habitual patterns of obstructing emotions. So that is when we really can engage in action bodhicitta with tremendous effectiveness and with wisdom. And so we can see in what His Holiness has been able to accomplish in one lifetime, we can see, all right, this is what action bodhicitta looks like in terms of skill and effectiveness and in terms of reaching people. So he has vast accomplishments that are benefiting vast numbers of people. And we aspire to follow right in those footsteps. And so the third level of understanding that he gave was action bodhicitta, and he gave it on the basis of the aspiration bodhicitta and refuge, which we had just done. And then the third part of that is seeing the Guru as a Buddha. So I'm going back to this. And this goes back to the view. So a lot of aspiration bodhicitta is working with the muddy water. And, we're essentially working with all of these habitual patterns. And now with the action bodhicitta, we are starting to learn how to relate not to the muddy water, but to the clear water. And it is exemplified by the Guru, seeing the Guru as manifesting as the Buddha for us, because we don't trust it in ourselves yet. So that is why, as we move into the action bodhicitta and as we move into depth with our understanding, we're able to see not only the Guru as the Buddha, but as we actualize our understanding of Buddha nature, we see the Buddha nature in ourselves and all sentient beings, but we can start with the Guru. At this point in the ceremony, then he said, do you want to take this vow? And so then he gave the third layer, which is still the words from Shantideva that we have right in our Sunday morning prayer book. Just as the Sugatas of old gave birth to the bodhicitta and progressed along the bodhisattva's path, so I too will become one with bodhicitta and accomplish bodhicitta in order to benefit all sentient beings. It is the same vow, but it is taken with a different level of maturity of understanding. And even though we have not totally cleared up all of our afflictive emotions and have not realized all the layers of emptiness, it is still given as a great benefit to what we would say are ordinary beings such as ourselves. Now, let's go back. When he was giving the different layers of the vows, he was inviting us to visualize. And this is very much a part of Tibetan Buddhism, and it's very much a part of all of Buddhism. So for instance, when I took my full ordination, we were in a big tent and they had the names written all around the whole tent of every person going back, the 2,500 years to the Buddha. And we were visualizing every single being who passed the ordination till it came down to me as we took ordination. Similarly, as we took the ordination, the Bodhisattva vow, we were visualizing all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas and all of the people, the lineage of Nagarjuna, the lineage of Asanga, person to person to person, who received the vow, kept the vow, and passed the vow coming down to us. So in this tradition, it is really beautiful that there's always a sense of continuity. And so you might have thought, he was describing a tree, and the tree had 5 limbs coming out, and there were different people on all the limbs. And this is very much a part of Tibetan Buddhism. We also call this a refuge tree. So when we're taking refuge, we visualize all of these beings. So these are 2 different depictions. But if we look at the one on the right, we have Nagarjuna's lineage, Asanga's lineage, the Vajrayana lineage above. We have all the Buddhas and all the Drikung masters from the beginning of Lord Jigten Sumgun down to holiness. We have all the Dharma protectors. So this is just a beautiful form of visualization. And if you take the previous class, you can see this refuge tree is waiting to be hung on Carol's wall. I have it hanging here right in my line of sight. So there's a sense of relating to the lineage through seeing a visual presentation of the history. And once you're familiar with it, then it doesn't seem so elaborate. It's more, this is my family. These are my cousins. These are the people who came to the US, and then these are the people from the old country. So there's a sense of familiarity, and in fact, by karmically connecting to His Holiness, I was really rejoicing because you were meeting my family. He is my root guru, and I studied with him extensively. So then a question came up about, what about what happened after the Bodhisattva vow? So after the Bodhisattva vow, he was requested to give empowerments for Dorje Dr. Hun's Sangha. So each group that invites His Holiness asks him to give teachings that their Sangha needs, or that Holiness might give a whole range of empowerments, as he did in India, so that all the teachers in the future have that empowerment. And that was new for many, many, many of you. It is not in relation to the Bodhisattva vow. So let's just keep those subjects separate. Now, in terms of Buddhism, we always say there were 84,000 different teachings, and those 84,000 different teachings reach different kinds of minds. So there are lots of different kinds of Buddhism, and you might come to one Sangha because you have a karmic connection. You might visit lots of different Sanghas, and you find that one kind of style is a fit for the way you understand things. And that's why we have lots of different, even within the Drikung, we have different kinds of presentations of the Drikung teachings, much less there's Chan, there's Zen, there's Vipassana, the insight meditation. So what I found interesting in the question as Kathy wrote it was, well, the Tibetan Buddhism seemed so ritualistic, and the Chan or the Zen is so simple. But actually, Chan has just as much ritual. You just haven't seen it yet. So in addition to having lots of different kinds of Buddhism, we have how it's presented in the US. So for instance, the Varsa that we were practicing in India, we were doing it using the rituals and ceremonies of the Chan tradition that started in China and came to Taiwan, which is the tradition that I received full ordination in. Huge rituals, lengthy ceremonies, Chinese music that is one syllable goes on for 10 minutes with, it's beautiful, but it's not it's not simple. And if you visit a temple in Japan, Japanese Buddhism has, not only does it have rituals, but Japanese Buddhism came to Japan to be firmly established through Dogen. And reading Dogen, he had an extraordinary mind. And where the Tibetan teachings are really presented in the framework of logic, Dogen presents the teachings like jazz music. Once you understand it's like jazz and poetry in jazz, then you start to see, I start to understand how this mind dominated Japanese Buddhism, and I understand how the koan tradition, or these incredible riddles, has the same fruition that we have in the logical Tibetan presentation, but through different doorways. So the fruition is the same, but how you get there is very different. So what's helpful is just to reflect not good or bad, complex or not complex, is more the manner that Buddhism is being presented is a style that fits my initial learning, or it doesn't. Or it might seem hard for me to understand, whereas another form is easy for me to understand. But in the end, once you start understanding one form, then you see, oh my goodness, it's really the same. It's just coming in a different way. So what I found so interesting when I was taking ordination in the Chinese Chan tradition, there was a tremendous emphasis on mindfulness of body through prostrations and through wearing the robes. So how we folded our robes was like origami. And the movement to do a prostration was intense mindfulness of body. So we're familiar with those in the foundation, Theravadan Buddhism. Theravadan Buddhism also offers a wonderful emphasis on mindfulness of body, exemplified maybe in walking meditation, and how they present the teachings. Just different ways and styles of communicating. Okay, so then someone wanted to know something about why is Vajrayana, why do we talk about secret mantra? Why do we talk about restricted teachings? And the empowerment that His Holiness was given was part of a group of empowerments that normally are given to very, very close students. Normally it would be his attendance, very close, that he would give in a very small room. So really what we understand is that Vajrayana is self-secret. It's not secret in that, no, you can't come. You're not good enough. There's something wrong with you. It's more, we're all learning, and there are levels of learning that have revelations of understanding. And a good way of thinking about that is, like, when we think of the sky, we go out every day and we think of the blue sky as sky. And even in Maine, there's enough light pollution that, we don't really even see very many stars when it turns into night. So we have an idea about what sky is, and that's our experience. And we don't know anything other than that from our direct experience. However, if an astronaut goes into space, they have a totally different experience of sky. They have not an intellectual understanding, but a direct experience of this richness, this vastly different, all the nebula, all the wild stuff we're seeing from the telescopes. That is their experience. And we haven't seen that yet. So somebody could tell us about it, but we couldn't, with our minds, yet work with it because we haven't had that experience of going out into space yet. So we're working at our experience level. And we can see that because in Vajrayana, there are lots of stages of practices. So if you came to morning meditation during the pandemic, we did a very simple Tara practice that was accessible to everyone. Because we understood it, it wasn't secret. And we could hold our attention on the 4 or 5 descriptive sentences and understand them. So the empowerment that he was giving, yes, it's absolutely wonderful to have received it. It is wonderful to read it over and over again. But then we have to ask ourselves, can I practice this? And if I can't actually practice this, what do I need to learn so that one day I can practice it? So the Dewa Dorji prayer book, the practice begins with Om Savo Ashuddha Sarvadharma Savo Ashuddhoham, all phenomena and myself dissolves into emptiness, and abiding in emptiness, we begin with a visualization. So if our concentration is not stable, if we can't sit in an undistracted way, we can read the prayers, but we can't actually practice it yet. But we can engage in a study and practice program so that we are continually preparing ourselves to be able to practice, and we can read it over and over so that as we learn the meanings of the words that are used, and we learn how to relate to dissolving our identity and ego and coming up as an insubstantial rainbow-like Tara or Chenrezig, and then eventually the more complicated ones. So these are all different kinds of skillful means, and understanding again that all of it is contained in the simplest practice. All of Vajrayana is contained in that one paragraph Tara. We just don't see that it's all there yet. And we keep practicing to understand better and better and more deeply. So what are we doing at Vajra Dakini? We've been practicing together, many of us, for about 4 years. Maybe we're in our 5th year. So essentially, all of this time, we have been working and training with aspiration bodhicitta. So let me see, nope. go all the way back. We are working with the muddy water. We are working with all of our habitual patterns that are continually getting in our way, all the self-absorption, all the, yes, we're all suffering, but my suffering is more important, hurts more, all of that filter and isolation of self, and transforming it into greater and greater capacities of being free from those habitual patterns and able to generate authentically loving kindness, compassion, rejoicing, and bodhicitta, equanimity. And so if we go back to historically, the first 2 years we worked with Shantideva. And here's Shantideva right there, who was the remarkable being who wrote the Bodhisattva's Way of Life. And then we worked for another 2 years on Lojong, which was Atisha. Atisha was, several hundred years later, and contemporary of, not only was he contemporary with the Kagyu lineage and our major leaders in the Kagyu lineage, but he came from India to Tibet, bringing the Lojong teachings, bringing the Lamrim, and Shantideva had been established in Tibet earlier, but reinforced Shantideva. So Shantideva's Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life is considered one of the 6 essential texts in Mahayana Buddhism. And we did a wonderful study of that. But then it's good to also understand a little bit more, because yes, we were reading Shantideva, but we were using a commentary from the 1800s by Patrul Rinpoche. So the accumulated wisdom of all of these wonderful teachers, the flowering of the teachers, the great, great beings, the great teachers of Tibet, left remarkable commentaries that help us understand the depth of Shantideva and how to make it useful, how to incorporate it into our own training and our own liberation from our habits. So I've actually studied the Bodhisattva's Way of Life in full twice, once in India and once with Venerable Pema Chodron. And then I've studied individual chapters with the Dalai Lama, 2 chapters directly with him, Patience and the Emptiness chapter, and Karl Burnholzer, who's an extraordinary genius translator who taught the Emptiness chapter. And then the Lojong slogans, we were using commentaries from Indian and Tibetan. So again, it's an accumulation of knowledge of how to think about these slogans, how to use them, all the different ways we could consider them. We looked at them from, multiple different teachers' perspective. And when I was studying them at Gampo Abbey, what I found really wonderful was to listen to Pema Chodron's teachings on Lojong in 5-year intervals. So I could see how a practitioner just like me grew. And it's not that it was the same slogan. And in essence, it's not that she teaches anything differently. It's more, she goes deeper with it in her own practice, and she's an extraordinary communicator. So those folks who were saying, oh, the video on Pema Chodron's teaching was so clear and accessible. Number one, she's an extraordinary communicator. There are many people who understand who are not effective communicators, but also she was teaching you. So she wasn't giving a class to Rinpoches. She wasn't giving a class to Tibetans. She was teaching the general the general public. So she skillfully was addressing exactly where we are in our understanding. And yes, that's very effective. And so here we have two things. We have the complexity that is all we will ever need in our lifetime, and where we are right now. And both are helpful and exciting and precious. So then that's what we have been doing on Sundays, and we will be going further next week with keeping the vow. And Holiness said, you never actually lose the vow because you don't lose your Buddha nature, but you can forget. So how do we keep present with this commitment that we've taken? And after that, we will be looking at some fundamentals of Buddhism that I think will give everyone a more firm foundation for all of the learning that we're going to be doing. And then just to say, the morning meditation was designed uniquely for our Sangha. It was designed for, at first, the pandemic. And then now we're working with adding the world peace prayer. So we're working with all the different kinds of confusion and chaos in the world as part of our bodhicitta practice. But it has the basic elements of Mahayana Buddhism and the opening and closing Drikung prayers. And I find for many people, the shorter Heart Sutra from the Japanese and Chinese tradition is an easier doorway to go through with the Heart Sutra. And then in our meditation retreats, we are particularly focused on the Sharvasti curriculum, which Holiness has designed to be accessible, to be universally incorporating both what the Buddha taught directly and layers of understanding, but for us in this time in particular. And I asked him about going deeper into Vajrayana, and we will in the next year or two. We'll see how that evolves. First, we'll do some fundamentals, and once the fundamentals are supporting us, then we'll go a little more deeply into Vajrayana. So that was in response to the questions that Kathy sent me. Are there questions that you have in addition? And let's close the YouTube live before we do that. Bodhicitta, excellent and precious mind, where it is unborn, may it arise. Where it is born, may it not decline, but ever increase higher and higher. Okay.